Great Satan, what is there, a Nintendo Direct going on or something? Holy fuck, this fucking Twitter is... Oh, well, there is. Or actually the Ultimate Direct. Looks like Nintendo's talking all about special or Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. Okay. Well, anyway. Woo, the Golden Stallion, the Man of Tomorrow, Sabzu, the Rated R radio star. Pick your names and pick your poisons, baby. It's here for your Wednesday Patreon-only Sovereign Tech Q&A. Though I got to tell you, we're gonna talk about some podcasting here relevant to Alex Jones. People have asked questions about that, so we'll get into that. It's not me talking about Sovereign Tech the whole time, even though I do get a lot of questions about that. But regardless, I have learned about some, specifically for podcasts, I've learned about some Patreon alternatives as late. I don't picture right now, like, moving away from Patreon. I mean, here's the thing, is that I think there's so many patrons, real quick, who I think they just support the show. You know, I'm honored. I'm not complaining. Okay. I think they just want to support the show, and they don't, they don't actually consume any of the content, or they consume very little of it, which, look, I appreciate it. That's fine. I'm just saying that if I move to another platform, I don't think this exactly falls under the network effect, but if I move to another platform that allows for this kind of subscription model podcast content, I could imagine losing money, on the matter. And because, some people just won't, they've got their things set on automatic. They don't even think about it, and they won't, go over to this side. And I know this because there are podcasts, or there are people on Patreon I'm subscribed to that I don't consume it. I don't consume any of their content. And, I'm doing it because, I care about the person, or or it's a nice way to support the person, or, whatever the reasons may be. There's myriad reasons. So yeah, switching over to a new platform, kind of a scary idea, I think, for a lot of people. Patreon really is taking advantage of that first mover advantage. So I don't know. And also, like, the alternatives to Patreon that I've found don't really accept cryptocurrency. And that would make it worth it, because I think if it accepted cryptocurrency, if crypto enthusiasts actually live by their own ideals, then, or their espoused ideals, then it would be worth it to do it, because then I think I would make significantly more money by changing over to that platform that accepts cryptocurrencies. But I'd have to get over it. That would have to be the thing that it accepts. If it's just going to accept credit cards and PayPal, me personally right now, I don't see any reason to leave Patreon. That kind of leads well into our first subject. Okay. Because this has been, so what, or not our first subject, but our first question. Why don't we go ahead and get into it? I did want to talk a little bit about what's happening with MoviePass, but I can update you about that later. There have been, I'm going to read the question that was, or one of the questions. I actually got asked about this by quite a few people. But I will, I'll get to the main question here in just a second. And anyway, but I want to say, so there have been, and I have taken what some consider to be controversial stances on some of this, particularly, like, say, Patreon. Patreon has, willy-nilly, with very, pretty much with their own biases and their own reasons. There's no real, like, set amount of rules necessarily. There's these very vague terms like hate speech and other things. They've shut down accounts for people that listen to me consider activists. One can think of a certain blonde woman that was banned, that I talked about quite a bit on Sovereign Tech Prime episodes, even, that I had no problem, and I actually applaud Patreon for banning, because I think she was partly responsible for many deaths in the Mediterranean. I think that really ever since, like, the Trump campaign started, okay, there has been very interesting lines drawn, okay, in the sand of politics and ideology and so on, where people really there seem to be very, and I know you're out there, but there seem to be very few people that kind of like stood above all the bullshit. And most people and a lot of which you'd think were standing above all the bullshit, actually went either hard left or they went hard right. You know, they either became pro-Trump or maybe even they became more of a left libertarian or like a market anarchist or something. Hell, maybe they even went a lot further, which, hey, whatever. So I think that that's been going on for quite some time, and there really has been this very serious divide that's been occurring. Now, obviously, this isn't going to shock anybody, me saying that. I mean, everybody, I think, or most people have kind of felt this. And, you know, one can get into the argument that really, you know, be it the empathetic or the asshole, depending which direction people went, or that's an unfair dichotomy. But you get my point, whether that person was always inside and it just took them the permission, say Trump getting in office, it gave them permission one way or the other that they wanted to go, you know, left or right, or if they still wanted to stay above things, which again, like I said, I know some did. You know, it gave them the permission to express that finally, and so they are expressing that side of themselves. That's in a way that's kind of neither here nor there. Okay. But regardless, this has been going on, and the lines of this divide are being drawn pretty much in every sector of the economy, every sector of ideology, I think. I mean, it's really happening just about anywhere. And unless you're really like more of an egoist, you know, you're not really above it all, because if you're not an egoist, you're buying into some kind of morality, right? You know, that some kind of moral narrative that is getting pushed upon you. Okay. When again, you know, we know scientifically, there is no such thing as morality. They're not something you can measure on the Planck scale. Like it's a complete construction. Okay. And it's often a narrative tool that gets used, you know, to push you in certain ways. Now, there are certain what I call human liberties that we have, not rights or morals or things like this, but things that we have by the innate biological nature of what we are, of the fact that we are humans. And frankly, I'll say this outright. I mean, freedom of speech, you know, that's treated as a right. It's not really a right. I mean, it gets called one. It gets labeled as one. I understand that. Okay. But you have the quote unquote freedom of speech really based upon the fact that Homo sapiens, when we as hominids broke away from our other hominids, you know, through the Broca divide, right? When suddenly, you know, we became a very special creature because we could not only say what we were, but we could define what we are. And like we could say it as in verbally to each other. And then we had language that allowed us to define what we are. And not only that, but we could also think about what we are. Okay, we could chew on the words that were coming out of our mouths and so on. And so really ever since, you know, humans evolved, you know, got past the Broca divide, you know, yeah, we've got the freedom of speech, right? I mean, you know, we can talk. Of course, granted, we have to accept the consequences of our words, but they're there. We can say them. And that's it. All right. And does anybody have the right to quash that? Well, like I said, rights are a funny thing, but there are consequences to what you say. No doubt about that. Okay. That doesn't mean you can't say them. It just means there's consequences. And, well, what comes of that? I say all this to preface I'll get into the question here, but just so that you understand where I'm coming from as far as what's called free speech or whatever. Okay. Here we go. So let me read the question. All right. Hey, Stallion, not sure if you've seen the news about Alex Jones's podcast being banned from Stitcher, Spotify, and Apple iTunes. And I know you're not exactly his biggest fan, but aren't you concerned at all about what this means for podcasts? Keep up the incredible work, and can we get that holiday special already? Okay, real quick, holiday special. I've had to completely rewrite it for varying reasons. There's been a lot of the production stuff going on. It's not on hold. It's just in very active development and having to be reworked. And I'm concentrating on a couple other things right now anyway. So that's all I can tell you about it. There's been points where it was all set. Then there's people that want to back out. And this is what happens when you work with a bunch of people. Not knocking anyone that I've worked with at all. I mean, they're all just wonderful human beings. Obviously, they're willing to work with me. But Silicon Valley doesn't seem to want to play ball with Alex Jones, do they? Well, now, first off, I want to say about my own thoughts on Alex Jones himself, okay? Now, I did hear about this. This has broader this is more about InfoWars itself than even just Alex Jones, okay? But yeah, with iTunes, I think it was 5 of 6 InfoWars podcasts. There was one with David Knight that wasn't pulled, but the other 5 were pulled. Spotify and Stitcher, I think, pulled all of theirs, and now it's even got to the point where YouTube and Facebook and I think just about everybody except Twitter has completely removed InfoWars content from their platforms. Okay, that's what's going on. This just happened, I think, like Sunday, or over the weekend or Monday. They a lot of them are saying, well, they broke terms of service. Oh, they did hate speech. They did this, blah, blah, blah. And, there's very nebulous reasons given for why exactly this happened. There is the argument that what really did it sounded like Alex Jones was threatening Robert Mueller, over a bunch of Russian shit and was like threatening him with a gun. Those are the claims. Those are what's been said. I personally, at this stage in my life, cannot listen to Alex Jones for more than a few seconds to see what exactly, hear and kind of make up my own mind on that. Because honestly, it doesn't matter. Okay. Should Alex Jones be able to say those kinds of things? I'm not going to stop him from saying those sorts of things. But regardless of that, okay, let's talk about, let me tell you about Alex Jones. Let me tell you about my own feelings on Alex Jones. I don't like Alex Jones. I think that he is. There was a time where I listened to his show like every day. There was a time where I watched like a shit ton of his documentaries and everything, and there are always things that were off about what he was saying. And there was always like these little weird, little nuggets that he'd just drop in that are like, wait, where's the evidence for that, right? It's like when you're reading, Bereshit, when you're reading the book of Genesis and you get to the verse about the Nephilim, you get to the verse about the giants and everything, right? It's what, Genesis 6:4, right? Chapter 6, verse 4. You get this one sentence. It's like, oh yeah, these sons of God were breeding with the daughters of men and they had giants and they were the men of renown. And then the verse ends and you're just like, whoa, what was that? You just kind of flip because it's like, wait, tell me more, okay, about what the hell these sons of God were and these giants that they were birthing through women and whoo. So I think there was the one Alex Jones documentary, I think it was called Endgame, that might have been the name of it. One of those, I don't know, I can't remember all the names of all those different ones. And in there's a point where he just drops, he out of nowhere, he's talking about, the Rothschilds and all this different stuff. And then he just drops and he says, and their plan for this transhumanist future where they will explore the stars and live forever. And he just drops that and then he just moves on. He says it for, I don't know, a whopping 10 seconds and then he just goes. And it's like, whoa, where did you get that from? That suddenly they have they are planning on exploring the stars and they have their own space program and they're into transhumanism. They're going in. I mean, I've read books like, Perfectibility and I know about that, but what? It just kind of comes out of nowhere. And I think that now, I mean, if you're dropping those things to make people inquisitive, that's one thing, but you'd need to have a format where people could be kind of inquisitive about it, and doing it on a documentary and just dropping little nuggets like that without a question mark at the end and making it as a factual statement. You just engaged in propagating horseshit, and it really, shoots in the foot a lot of other things that he might have said that might, and I say might have some validity. So but there was somehow Alex Jones, though, years ago, and we're talking, this might have been almost 10 years ago. Somehow Alex Jones was asked to like give a I don't know, what do you call it, commencement speech or something at a college, for a graduating class. I don't know how the hell that happened, but he did. And and he gives this, and it was a really great speech. Like, I was really impressed, and he said something that impressed the hell out of me that I'm sure he wouldn't say today, but I gave him credit back then for saying it. He said, once you see the world, once you understand what I'm putting out there, once you understand he was more or less saying, once you understand what InfoWars is putting out there, and you kind of buy into a lot of their initial premises, he says, you don't need me anymore. You don't need to listen to me anymore. You don't need Alex Jones anymore. You can go forward with your own critical thinking and grasp, what's going on and make decisions for yourself. You do not need to listen to me anymore. He admitted, he says, I know this is a terrible thing for me to say, or, as a radio, whatever, and a journalist. He said, but no, it's like, you can get to the point where you just don't need me and you can think for yourself. And it was a great message of thinking for yourself. Of course, granted, he wanted you to buy into some of his initial premises that could be, problematic. But I gave him credit for that, for saying, no, you don't have to look to me as the Delphic goddamned oracle. You can listen to me, and then once you get it, you never have to listen to me again, and you go forward. I think that's beautiful, okay? So there's parts of what Alex Jones does that I can kind of appreciate, okay? There's parts. Then I always, one of the things that impressed me about him as well is that, like, at least, 10 years ago, he didn't mind hippies, he didn't mind like a lot of that because he just considered them to be anti-establishment. He didn't have an issue with them. I thought that was really great. There's a lot of things where he just seemed really open and respectful of just anything that was anti-establishment. That seems to have dramatically changed, obviously, in recent years. So I say all that just to say that I'm not like, oh, I fucking hate Alex Jones. Okay, I will give credit where credit's due. Granted, that credit may no longer be available 10 years later because he seems to be a very different person. And one only has to read about or listen to him talk about gay juice boxes and other shit, and you're just going to be like, okay, no, I'm not listening to this guy. And I certainly appreciate and respect that. I haven't listened to him in forever. I kind of had my moment sort of when I was first getting into libertarianism and anarchism and everything. He was just one of the guys in a way. I know he wouldn't exactly like fit under libertarianism either, but regardless of that, anyway. So like I said at the beginning of that, he has been, or InfoWars, which what of that isn't exactly Alex Jones, right? I know there's other guys involved, none of whom I'm impressed with any more than him. But regardless, all of that has been removed from pretty much every one of these platforms. Facebook, again, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube. It's gone. This is something. Do I agree with the tech companies doing this? Well, it's their platforms. They can do whatever the fuck they want. They can remove me, and I can, scream and get some righteous indignation going on about it. Okay. But at the end of the day, yeah, they can call that shot. They can say, no, we're not going to have this on there. And honestly, they can be as frivolous. They can be as wanton as they want to be. They don't even, it doesn't have to, because here's part of it. Okay. Their terms of service, they don't have to follow their own terms of service. Frankly, even from whatever, basic standpoint, they are offering their services for free. It's not like InfoWars was paying to be on Spotify. They weren't paying to be on iTunes. They weren't paying to be on Facebook. Maybe they were buying some ads, but well, that's another story. But as far as the distribution of the podcast and video content itself, they're not paying YouTube. They're not paying any of these platforms. These platforms are offering it totally for free. And in that sense, I think that if a company feels that they just want to take you away, what is no skin off their back? If anything, you're a loss leader. They could just say, no, yeah, they're taking up too much bandwidth. Sorry, got to go. This is the funny thing, and this has happened many times in libertarianism where someone's YouTube channel has been shut down and all this stuff. I don't feel bad for them at all. Like not for a second do I feel bad, because they're not paying a dime. And Google, well, we've talked about this recently. I don't remember if it was a Q&A or if it was on Sovereign Tech Prime or what. But people don't understand just how deadly video is on the internet. I mean, video is what keeps us from having so many nice things on the internet. And, you know, I mean, like I've said before, I don't think there's any way YouTube's really making money. I mean, they pretty much have to create a subscription service. They have to do YouTube TV, because it's the only way that company could even dream of becoming profitable, because there's no way they're cutting a profit with, you know, the amount of servers that it takes, the amount of bandwidth that it takes, with the raw amount of data getting uploaded to YouTube at any given moment. There's no way. Okay. It's almost a kindness. Not really, because, you know, fuck Google, but it's almost a kindness that this is even available. I mean, it's really at that stage. Okay. So no, I don't give a rat's shit. I mean, you know, that if these things take you down, they take you down. Now, but I do give a rat's shit in another way. And this is maybe, I don't know what you're hoping I was going to say. I don't know what you're expecting me to say. But I have complained specifically, I mean, Stitcher, you know, whatever, Stitcher's Stitcher. I know there's people that use it, but it's not exactly like, you know, breaking down the bulkheads as far as users. Okay. Spotify, I know Spotify is a massive animal, but I read some interesting podcast statistics recently, and that is at least in America, 64% of Americans, 64% of Americans, they know what podcasts are. 17% of Americans actually listen to podcasts, and that number has not grown exponentially. That has been a very, very, very slow growth. Okay. So point being is that you barely even have, out of the people that have even heard of podcasts, you barely have a quarter of them that even listen to them. And that's just out of the people that even know what podcasts are. And you know, I mean, 64% is a good number, but still, you know, and this is based upon whatever statistics and everything. But like, you know, NPR and all these other companies saying, oh, podcasts is the new medium. I mean, it is the new medium, but like their meteoric growth and stuff like this, like those numbers actually don't hold up when you get some independent, you know, research and statistics on the matter. Okay. So, but regardless of that with podcasting, for whatever fucking reason in podcasting, in that audience, iTunes is still like top billing. Apple is still top billing as far as if you want to make it big, if you want to be seen as a serious podcaster, you've got to be making it in certain categories on iTunes. I cannot for the life of me figure out why, especially because most of the people that I talk to, now, I mean, this is anecdotal, but most of the people that I interact with, and I know I have listeners that have iPhones, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying most of the personal people that I interact with and that I deal with, you know, like everybody has Android phones. And most people I know use Pocket Casts for their podcasts, which granted Pocket Casts uses iTunes feed, you know, podcast database, you know, to whatever, add in a lot of its features and like show what's new and noteworthy and things like this. But regardless, like most people aren't in Apple's ecosystem that I encounter that are listening to podcasts. And I mean, we're talking about people that listen to podcasts like almost 24/7, I think. I mean, it's really wild. So my point being is I have no idea why iTunes is such a juggernaut. But I have said, because of that, and I have said this for many, many, many years, and people have misconstrued what I said about this, okay? I have said that if you are reliant upon really any tech giant, but in this case, Apple, to have whatever you're doing make it big, you are at the mercy of that company, and you are really an employee of that company. I think if you have to make it big with podcasting, if you have to do it through iTunes, like and you're gaming iTunes, you know, trying to climb that ladder and things like this, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but if you're reliant upon that, and much of podcasting is, honestly, in some ways, not even by people's choice, okay? You know, you're effectively an employee of Apple. Just like I think YouTubers are effectively employees of Google. And yes, they are. And this shows the danger of when you have like this monolithic database of entertainment or in podcasting. And this is what I've been warning about for a while. Okay. Because, Apple can ultimately just pull the plug on you. And then you could still do independent feeds through, through Pocket Casts and through other apps and whatever. But you're going to lose. I know what it's been like. So there was a few years ago, SoundCloud reset all of their RSS feeds. And somehow I didn't get the memo. If they told people, I missed it. And I wondered because my listener numbers, again, this is 3-4 years ago, were literally cut in half. I mean, just like 1 week, and all I could think was, holy fuck, what did I say? What did I do? I mean, it was cut in half. But what was happening and I had people come up to me a year later. It's like, are you still doing the show? And I was like, yeah, I do it every week. And they said, well, fuck, I haven't gotten any, notifications that a new episode was out. And it's because they changed the RSS feed. Now, RSS feeds are, and it can be an independent thing, and that's a good thing. Okay, I'm not necessarily complaining about that. But my point being is that most people aren't going to take the time to constantly go to your website to make sure they have the latest RSS feed or something. And if iTunes pulls a podcast, or any company pulls a podcast, it's a good bet you're just going to lose those download numbers and those listener numbers because, they're just going to think, oh, well, I guess they're done. I guess they're not doing new podcasts. They won't really bother to look into it. And and this is so like within podcasting itself, I have roughly 13,000 listeners or so right now. Okay. It varies a little bit on that, but roughly 13,000 listeners for Sovereign Tech. I have just over 100 patrons. I get very, very few questions and I've reopened questions for the show, which used to be a very popular thing, but I get very, very few questions into the show. Now, maybe that's because kind of like what Alex Jones said, where, once you get my perspective, you don't need to ask me questions anymore. You don't need to look to me anymore. Maybe that's what's happened is people have gotten my perspective or something, or they just stopped listening. Either one's fine. Not that I'm any kind of thought leader. But regardless, my point being, most people that will listen to your show and might love you to death, they're not going to take much action on the show. And I'm just as bad. Like my favorite podcast is Security Now with Steve Gibson. I've had interactions, thankfully, with Steve, and I'm honored by that. But like, I don't write into a show questions. I don't do, really interact. I will buy any sponsor that he gets generally, if it's like a reasonable price thing. I will, purchase stuff through his sponsors when he has them. But, in general, I don't really interact with the show. I don't do much else as far as that goes. So I get it, but that's the thing is that you're really like, you can't expect people to take action, on this stuff. So if you get dropped from iTunes, you could really lose your entire audience. Like that is entirely possible, and they will not come looking for you. That is my point in saying that. All right. So this is pretty serious. I think, this shows, this is just, as far as Alex Jones goes, because he's on the national consciousness, he's not going to really hurt from this. If anything, it's going to make him grow. In fact, the InfoWars app, which lets you consume content just through the app on iOS, is still available in the App Store, which is also kind of strange. Like Apple, okay, you're going to ban him from iTunes, but you're not going to drop his InfoWars app. Of course, as of this recording, maybe they've done that now. But like the installs for the InfoWars app went through the roof. So people were willing to do this. But again, you personally, you podcaster with only 3 to 4 to 5 digit listener numbers, you're not going to get the national attention that Alex Jones is getting over this. Okay. So you're going to want to create the narrative with your listeners of being very independent, trying not to, rely upon platforms like iTunes, for podcasts, or even Stitcher or Spotify or whatever. Okay. By the way, the reason I brought up the percentages earlier about podcast listeners is that Spotify, that's not a huge deal because they've only recently added in podcasts over the past year or so. And obviously the main reason people listen to it is to listen to the music. And who knows how well that works being in a music app, because you have like Google Play Music that has podcasts, but then for some fucking well, I know the reasons, but Google decides to come out with its own podcast app, which that should be interesting in itself. That podcast app does not let you put in independent RSS feeds. Now, you could say maybe that's a feature that'll come in the future. If so, okay. But I wouldn't be surprised if they want control of that economy and they only let you listen to podcasts that they want you to, because clearly the major players in the podcast space are making that statement right now, that they don't want you to listen to whatever podcast they want or that you want to. They don't want to make any podcast available to you. There are ones that they won't play ball with, that they won't have out there. Okay. So while I don't have any real sympathy for Alex Jones, I do have sympathy for the podcasting industry, that we are getting very clear signals that we have to be fiercely independent in our distribution and as podcasters in general. I've said this many times. If SoundCloud finally tanked, and it's amazing that it's still out there, if SoundCloud did finally tank, all right, or if Patreon or whatever happens, okay, if somehow I couldn't host Sovereign Tech the way that I'm hosting it right now, I would be completely, distributing it through my own RSS feed from my own server in my own damn house. That's what I'd be doing, and I'd have it mirror elsewhere. But bottom line being is that I would be complete. I mean, this is just something that we're learning, and this is the hard message from this. Okay. The person says, aren't you concerned at all about what this means for podcasts? Oh, fuck yes, I am. I'm very concerned about what this means for podcasts. And no, I would not have done what Apple and Spotify and Stitcher have done. Okay. Because and this is the same thing with books. I give Amazon this much credit, even though, well, we might talk about this on an upcoming episode of Stephanie, but like there's been some back and forth on how Amazon deals with erotica, okay, which has been, which I've called tantamount to burning books. But previous to that, Amazon was really solid on, no, look, if you're going to write a book about a triceratops fucking a woman or a guy, then we'll, you could say that's bestiality, sure, and I don't really find it an attractive concept at all, but we'll allow for that to be there. We will have Taken by the T-Rex, and I've got to give Amazon credit for, at the very least, allowing that or being standoffish so much about it. Now, that's and that gets into a whole other thing about sex, because dinosaurs and all. That's all fantastical situations. It's not like real bestiality, okay, where, people are doing whatever with goats, chickens, and dogs. Because that's all that, that real, that's just horrendous. But regardless of any of that, don't want to get sidetracked here, is that, these platforms should be pretty agnostic in how they deal with this. Unless you're getting like state actors sending out podcasts that are like for informants and stuff like that, like then, okay, I could be a little more understanding of it, also because, governments are inherently unethical. And honestly, so are, in my opinion, if you're a resistance that's just looking to put in a government in the government's place, you're just as bad as the government that's there. All right. So, if you want to use it to spread your rebellious message for your upcoming government, no, I don't have any sympathy for you either, and fucking take you down. But regardless of all that, okay, yeah, this should be a warning sign for the entire podcasting industry that you are, as of now, if you didn't think you were before, as of now, if you are in any way like telling people, well, rate me on this, help me get bigger on this, blah, 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 you're pretty much their employee, because you can get fired, right? You can be removed. And so if you're reliant upon that, you are beholden to them and you're effectively working for them. And the most egregious example of this that drives me up the fucking wall is there's the show from Torrent Freak, which I love Torrent Freak. And I enjoy the show. Steal the show. In fact, Paige Peterson's been on there. She knocked it out of the park. She was brilliant, as always. And but Steal the Show at the end of every episode says like, rate and rank us up on iTunes, rate us on iTunes. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. You're like all about the torrent community, the anti-DRM community, the anti-IP, anti-copyright and all this. And you're telling people to fucking use iTunes and to rank you up? What? Like even mentioning iTunes without like some kind of, guttural, I don't know, visceral reaction or sound in your voice. If you're doing a show that is pro-torrenting and all that, I mean, that makes no sense in the world. So, I mean, there's people that are pretty egregious about this. But, yeah, bottom line being, this is very concerning. All podcasters should really be, you should be setting up, podcast listeners, okay, keep tabs. I don't know how you want to do that, be it going to their website on maybe once a week, or following them on Twitter perhaps, or because Twitter didn't remove Alex Jones, so I guess some people are safe on Twitter. I mean, Twitter's getting a whole bunch of shit for this anyway, okay? Because, wait, why aren't you banning him when you've banned, I don't know, Yiannopoulos and all these other, asshats, okay? Maybe keep an eye on them on Twitter, whatever it is, okay, to make sure that you can stay up to date with. Maybe a podcaster is going to have to put out a new independent RSS feed, okay? So keep up with the podcasters you love in some way, or if they have a newsletter, like I have an email newsletter. This is the exact reason I created the Sovereign Tech newsletter, which if you haven't signed up for it yet, zog.email, zog.email. And there's a subscription bar it's the premier part of the page, okay? And you can get, signed up for that. This is the reason I did a newsletter, okay? Because I wanted independent platforms, independent technologies and communications to be able to tell people, hey, if something goes down, like what's happening with Alex Jones, I want to be able to tell you where to go next. Like where to get new episodes of Sovereign Tech, what the new RSS feed is, etc. So if you're a podcaster, set up these alternatives. Be prepared, be knowledgeable about these alternatives, because you could have some ugly downtime if not. Is this against free speech? In a way, but at the same time, yes, Apple is completely able to do this. Of course they are. Okay? But at the same time, and like I said, I don't feel bad about Alex Jones, but I am concerned about what this is saying. I mean, this is censorship that, in a way, in a very real way. This is Apple, this is Spotify, this is Stitcher, this is Facebook, this is Google/YouTube. This is all of them saying, if you say anything we don't like, and it could be anything, you're toast. You are off of our platforms. And that's why I've said for years on Sovereign Tech, do not rely on third-party platforms as much as you can help it. Do not. Okay. Podcasting and email, like my newsletter and podcasting, those are things that they're really, especially, RSS feeds, they're federated technologies, not meaning that they're federal, meaning that, they don't have to have a central point of failure. They don't have to have a central server. They have to have a server, but the thing is you could create your own server. You can send email from your own server. You can send podcasts from your own server. All right. And you won't have to rely so much on a third party. You can do it yourself. I'm not saying it's easy. You might have a learning curve if you're not the most technically inclined, but it's not a bad idea to be looking into that if your show isn't just some kind of vanity thing that you're doing and it's something that you actually give a damn about. Like Sovereign Tech, this is my livelihood. This is my life. This is what I do. I do side hustles and jobs, outside of that, and I have clients and everything. But my primary thing that I am always thinking about, and if someone asks me, what do you do? This is what I do. And I've got the listeners to show it. That it works. And that it's, this is, in the podcast world, this is a popular fucking show. And of course I have the patrons to thank you for that. And yeah, what happens if Patreon decides to cut things off? Well, if that happens, we go to alternatives. Okay. And if I have to, I'll set up a very independent thing that will be cryptocurrency based, on my own. I know people are like, well, the market's speaking, you should create it. There's kind of like, there's yours.network. There's some other things that are kind of trying to do this. But it's funny. The people that always say that, hey, market opportunity, they're always the ones that don't do jack shit. So spare me that little bit of quote unquote advice. Okay. Why don't we, wow, that went kind of long. But I think that was important to get out there. So why don't we, let's get to another question here. Okay. So, all right. Yeah, all right, real quick, the MoviePass update. Let me talk about that. So, because last week on Sovereign Tech Prime, we talked about, or in the most recent episode, we did talk about MoviePass quite a bit, and we talked about it on a Q&A Wednesday Q&A a few episodes ago. So MoviePass has rolled back, okay, on a lot of the changes that they were going to make that caused me to unsubscribe. Like, I am no longer a subscriber of MoviePass, and I will not be going back. For a second, I thought about it, because what they've done is they've stopped the ban on the 2-week ban on premiere films, and they've pretty much said, and they've also they're not going to raise the price to $14.95 from $9.95. And they said all they're going to do is okay, no, that $9.99 a month is just going to be for 3 movies a month, but you can see any movie whenever you want to see it. Any standard 2D movie, I guess. So you could go see Mission Impossible, right? The day that it came out with these changes rolled out. I think it's a smart move on MoviePass's part. I will say, however, it's not like I'm already burned and I've already gone through the process of canceling. To say, okay, no, I'm done. I think 3 movies a month at $9.95 a month and any movie you want, that's still worthwhile. Like, that price is still valid to do so, or, to go for that, because again, you see 1 movie and it's paid for. You see 3 movies and it's paid for, 2-3 times over. But it's not worth the hassle of opening up the app, which the app barely works with Lineage OS anyway, and doing and having all these updates and doing all this other shit and handing over my data. Like, the value cost, the value add to my life doesn't add up anymore. Okay, it doesn't equate anymore to my willingness to deal with MoviePass. So I am still going to stay canceled, but this is definitely a smart move on their part. And like I said on Sovereign Tech last week, I said, there's a chance they could still survive this. They could live through this, and they could still come out on top. And I think that this is maybe the smartest direction that they could do to keep them from staying afloat and staying alive. And you're not here to listen to me sing. Yeah, so there you go. That's what's happening with MoviePass. So they're not dead yet. But if they were going to keep going with their plans, I think they absolutely would have been. I really don't doubt that at all. So, all right, let's get on to another question here. And this is a doozy. Ooh, we get to talk about sex, baby. All right. I love to talk about sex. Savzu, I really enjoyed the question segment a couple of episodes back on Sovereign Tech where the person asked about living longer and the purposes of sex. When the emailer brought up that when we become some transhuman spacefaring race, it made me wonder, become some transhuman spacefaring race that things could be different. It made me wonder, is there ever going to be a time when we don't need to have sex anymore, where it won't be so much a part of the human condition, as you say? I'd like this for a Patreon Q&As. I want to share something somewhat personal. I am trans, and it has honestly been a challenge for me to find relationships that are respectful of my life choices. Not everyone is as enlightened as the Great Stallion. Well, it's Golden Stallion, but Great Stallion works too. I like that. Thank you. I'm sure you knew that. It has honestly been, and I don't know if I'm enlightened, but thank you. It has honestly been depressing at times, and I've been wondering if we ever got to a post-sex world, can I call it that? If maybe the genitalia of a person won't really matter when we get there, and maybe it won't be so much of a challenge to find acceptance and love. Please keep doing what you're doing, and there are few podcasts that I feel comfortable listening to that genuinely respect me as a person. Also, can't wait for more Star Trek Forbidden Frontiers. Woo! Yeah, so real quick, Star Trek Forbidden Frontiers. A lot more of that coming. And the audio theater, the whole thing. This is definitely the most fun I've had in a while. This is really, really cool. So, but August and July, well, really, the whole summer has been kind of a unique animal, but I'm not going to bore you with all of that. Bottom line being, yes, more Star Trek Forbidden Frontiers to come, including the resolution to the Another Side of Paradise story that's been going for, 6 issues of the Sovereign Tech newsletter now. Can you believe it? Anyway, okay, so more of that coming. Thank you. I'm glad you're interested in that. All right. So let's get to the question here. Is there ever going to be a time where we don't need to have sex anymore? Okay, let me stop on that. No, we don't have to have sex right now. Like, hell, there's whole groups that are all about like not breeding, not that sex is only for or even primarily for breeding. Like there's Vehement, right? The voluntary human extinction movement. Okay. There's that out there, which I don't know if they're like necessarily asexual in persuasion, but, or, you know, not persuasion might not be the right term. You know, maybe that's something other than persuasion. I don't know if they're asexual. I don't know what the deal is, but you know, they're out there and they're certainly arguing for, well, they argue for birth control. So I guess that they're still going for sex, or, you know, that sex is still on the table, but regardless, yeah, I mean, we don't need sex now. You know, yeah, the human species won't propagate, you know, if everybody bought into that, but we really don't need to, you know, to have sex now, honestly, as far as that goes. But regardless, or you kind of extrapolate further, where it won't be so much a part of the human condition as you say. Yeah, so for me to expand a little bit, I do think that sex is actually, I think, first, it co-evolved at the very least with, you know, it co-evolved with breeding, all right? It co-evolved with propagating the species, okay? But it co-evolved. It co-evolved with a social interaction that sex is, a bonding that sex is. Sex is clearly not, I mean, and even if you're somebody who is, you know, you're the Christian person that is really into, no, we have sex for procreation and that is it, blah, blah, blah. Even you still feel the closeness and the bond with the person that you just made love with. You know, to recognize that it isn't just about procreation, because obviously scientifically we know that creation didn't start from the very second that you came into that woman, right? So it's very obvious that sex is something that co-evolved at the very least. I would go so far as to argue, okay, and I think there's some evidence around this. I would go so far as to argue that its primary purpose isn't even for procreation. Its primary purpose is for social bonding. I would argue that, but that's me. So beyond that, okay, so how will it be, you know, will there be a time where it's not a part of the human condition? Yeah, if we get to this, you know, where people are uploading their brains in robot bodies or however they're becoming transhuman, sure, sex probably wouldn't be a part of the human condition for a bunch of reasons. For example, would we still have hearts? And I mean physical hearts. You know, these hearts put out electromagnetic fields that I think are part of that bond, of that closeness with the person when you hug them, when you love them, when you have sex with them, whatever. Okay, there's a lot of elements that make up sex that aren't just penis and vagina, because sex is more than just PIV. It's more than just penis and vagina, okay? Because it can also be vagina and vagina, woo! But it's a lot of other things, okay? And with that said, you know, if you take away the human body, yeah, I very much think that you take away, you know, a lot of what makes sex an attractive thing. Okay, to being, or what make it a necessary, well, not, I don't want to say necessary, because again, there are asexual people, or there are people who just aren't interested in sex. Okay, but for lack of better phrasing, that make it how about an inherent, or even inherent's a tough word, that make it a major part of the human condition. Okay, there's a lot at play, you know, with that. So, you know, if we get to this transhuman future where, I mean, maybe likely the lines between male and female and the popular concepts, and I use that term very carefully, the popular concepts of gender, will they fall away? Yeah, they'll probably fall away. Will genitalia matter at that point? No, it won't matter. And in fact, it'd almost be kind of ridiculous to like replicate, you know, human sex organs in a robot body. Like, why? You know, I mean, unless you get some kind of joy out of doing it with flesh and blood people, because then at least one person is getting sort of a biological reaction to it, as compared to something being programmed that I would argue is pointless or superfluous. Like, I'm not saying robots wouldn't have sex, and I think that there might be, but I think that's something that would kind of evolve through, I don't know, an exchange of energy, you know, of power, of recharging batteries. Maybe that would feel sexual or something like that. But I think it would be something wholly different. It would be very, very different. And we are small-minded if you think that just transferring the human into a robot body isn't in some way creating an entirely, completely different species. We won't be human anymore if we do that. Okay, we are something else. And I'm not saying that we're something bad. I am just saying that we are not human anymore. And I dare say, as I've said many times on Sovereign Tech, we are not ourselves anymore. Like the instant Brian Sovereign, and it'd be against my wishes, the instant Brian Sovereign gets uploaded into a robot body, I am no longer Brian Sovereign. Brian Sovereign no longer exists. I don't know what the fuck that is, but it's not Brian Sovereign. Okay, it has Brian Sovereign's memory engrams. It's a robot, but that's about all you can say about it. That is not me. It can't be me. Like just by the nature of the process, it cannot be me. All right, and I would argue that even if you just took my brain out, put it into a vat, that is not me. I need all of those, neurons. I need all of those connections from my brain to connect to something that gives me sensory input that makes me. Okay? So, but that said, like, all right, and I really should have said this at first. I really empathize. I can only imagine, and barely, I can only imagine how hard it is for you in the present, especially the present cultural climate that we live in, for you to find a relationship, like a deep, meaningful relationship. You might be getting harassed at work. I mean, things like I just can't, and I just all of my empathy in the world to you for having to go through that. And I'm sorry that you're not finding, love, or acceptance in general. How about that? I really feel bad about that. Do I think that in a transhuman spacefaring race, robot future world or whatever, that these kinds, that gender and things like this will fade away? Yeah, of course they will. Sex will probably fade away. Probably. Okay. I'm at that point where I think that's so. So yeah, it could be, that could become a post-sex world. Now, we can become a spacefaring race without being transhuman. And of course, what do you mean by what does one person mean by transhuman? I am all about life extension technology, but life extension technology can be organic and biological. It does not have to be mechanical and robotic. Okay. Like we can extend our lives, I think, with our parts intact without having to do any transfers and shit like this. Okay. Of our consciousness, what is even consciousness, right? So, I think we can get there, and I think we can be a spacefaring race, and I think sex will still be a major part of what it means to be human for a lot of people. Not everyone, but for a lot of people. It'll still be a very, very big deal. So, yeah, I mean, and I would dare argue that the people that would do a lot of this space exploration are perhaps, I mean, if we want to get into some, biology and genetics and things like this, of course, there's a 7R gene, which is something that I've been exploring, quite a bit lately. And if you know what I mean by the if you know what the 7R gene is, which that's the explorer gene. And these people are generally more sexual and a lot of other things. Okay. It might be a subject we'll come up with later on. But bottom line being is that a lot of the risk takers that would be up in space are, might also be very sexual, depending upon their genetic expression. And that doesn't make them superior, doesn't make them inferior, just makes them human. It's what they are. I think Sexploration, as it were, I think there's like a Janet Jackson song called that, is going to be, a major part of being a spacefaring race. I don't think that that's necessarily going to go away. Now, if you're going to go with the transhuman spacefaring race, then yeah, I do think for those robots and whatever people there will be a post-sex civilization, as it were. And that, genitalia is going to be pretty meaningless. I mean, you don't have to shit, you don't have to piss, so they don't have that purpose, which, it's so funny when people tell me that, oh, no, sex didn't co-evolve. It didn't co-evolve is for procreation and for pleasure, and for social lubricant and things like this. Well, your dick co-evolved for peeing and coming. Things do co-evolve, folks. Things do have multiple purposes in why they come to fruition. Anyway, whatever. So there's my thoughts on that. And again, my total sympathies and empathy for you. I mean, it can be challenging for anyone. It's challenging enough for anyone to find love and relationships and acceptance in this modern world that we live in. And I know how much harder it must be for you. And I'm honored that you're a patron. I'm honored that you listen. I'm honored by the words that you said about me and that you sent to me. And it's a great question. But no, I think I don't see sex going away anytime soon. That doesn't mean, it can go away for parts of the population if they want it to. Like I said, that can happen right now. But it could certainly be a big deal, in this transhumanist future, sure. But I think there's always going to be people that are going to want to hold on to that because it means so much to them. It provides, your need for acceptance. It provides their need for acceptance. And there's a whole mental game around sex too that some people develop, which I think is really an outcropping of trauma. That is where robots may still want to have sex, because what's like the old, there's a quote from Oscar Wilde that sex is the only thing that isn't about sex. Sex is about power. So in that sense, maybe a transhumanist creation would still want to have like something mimicking sex because they still want that expression of power. But I hope we kind of get past that. Not that I have a problem with power, but like power over and I don't know, that gets into weird things. So, okay. I hope I answered that question to satisfaction. If you have more questions on it, please ask away. Or if you think I said something stupid, tell me. All right. All right, I guess let's get into this. There's one last email here that I wanted to get to last week, so I want to get it in, and then we'll go to our album of the week, which won't be a terribly long one. So this is, all right, and this is posted on Patreon. I love the tech news, the Q&A, the philosophy, and egoist perspective. Hell, there's nothing I don't like about it. At the same time, it seems to me there's less discussion around how to use the tech for personal freedom as a tool to reject government and corporatism. Example, it's a given that Microsoft sucks. Rather than accepting their dominance, more discussion around how to use alternatives would be better. Just a suggestion. So I addressed this on this week's Sovereign Tech Prime episode. Was that episode 289? And I hear you, and I understand. And I appreciate you asking for that. And I might start taking a little bit of a stronger stance on this. But like I said in this past week's Sovereign Tech Prime episode, I've been promoting the alternatives and how to go forward with them, and that I'd be there to interact with you if you're feeling lonely and whatever. And nobody jumps on it. And so I'm just like, all right, well, see you later. And then, of course, what happens is when I use the not so alternative, like when I create a Facebook group, then Facebook pulls bullshit on me and I go away. So, as far as social media goes, again, I'm convinced that social media itself is inherently a problem. Okay. And that it's not healthy and it's not good. So I don't really have an interest so much in being a part of that. Okay. At all. In any way, shape, or form. Sometimes I put stuff out on Twitter to let people know if a show's going to be late or something like that. But mainly I use Patreon. Yes, I have an Instagram where I share some things, but there's some pretty specific purpose behind a lot of that. But yeah, I have a real problem with social media in general. The alternatives, yeah, we need to be talking a lot more about alternatives again. And I think it's getting to the point where part of the reason that I would be willing to talk about this stuff, is that not all of my audience is libertarian anymore. And I've lost hope in that libertarians understand why they need to use independent technologies. Maybe the Alex Jones thing will wake them up. I hate to use that term. That's an Alex Jones term. You got to wake up, sheeple, but maybe that will make them more aware of, we can't rely on tech giants. But as far as I can tell, most libertarians, are a lot of libertarians and ANCAPs and others are just willing to suck, the tech giants' dicks. Obviously, listeners of this show, I don't think so much are into that, but I'm just saying that a lot of them, I feel that's what I see. And no matter how strong of a case I think I make to them of why they should stop, they don't. So I got to the point of, okay, well, then we'll just talk about what Microsoft's doing this week. We'll just talk about what Google's doing this week, blah, 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 because, I got the guess that that's what a lot of my audience wanted to hear. So, but maybe this stuff will rekindle the desire to have independent platforms and independent technologies and taking control of your own data, etc. With that said, yeah, I do, I'll tell you something, just a preview of what I want to push hard on sovereign tech. Everybody should be setting up their own NAS. Everybody should be setting up their own NAS, their own network area storage, and they're to the point where they are as easy to plug in many ways as a computer. Everybody should be doing that and should be using the software available through that NAS, even if all of it is an open source. People should be getting on board with this. They should be spending the few $100 to really, really start setting up the private cloud. It is becoming more and more important. Like, I could use an NAS to host Sovereign Tech. I could use an NAS to host my email. The possibilities are remarkable what you can do. And I think that's really a direction that we need to go, okay, is to set up our own mini networks and get used to that. So that's something I'll be pushing for quite a bit in upcoming Sovereign Tech. So I'm not as fatalist as perhaps I might have sounded in the recent Sovereign Tech episode, just because, and I got that out there because it's a lot of stuff that I really wanted to say and I hadn't been able to say for a while. Or not that I hadn't been able to, but I hadn't had the opportunity. How about that? Okay, let's go into our album of the week quick, and this is just a total shocker. Like I was blown away when it came up. I was listening on Pandora, and I forget what station I had on for Pandora. I think I might have put in Gunship, and a group called, or I don't know if it's a group, but The Midnight came up, and that's what they're called, The Midnight. And it was an album off the album Nocturnal, which is from October 2017, so fairly new, not even a year old yet. And there was a song there was a track on there called Collateral. And this had such a sexy hook to it. Totally, instrumental synthwave. Okay, this is synthwave. And like a saxophone comes in, a little bit of a riffing guitar will come in at certain points, but it was so sexy. So sexy. I was like, holy shit. I instantly, I shared it with Ellen, and I was like, you got to hear this. It's so sexy. She's like, oh yeah, that was sexy. And it was brilliant. And all of their stuff is just really gold. You can listen to everything by The Midnight. I was really, really pleased with what I heard. So you're not getting a metal pick this week. I know most of them have been metal picks, but you're getting a synthwave, which is certainly up there in my favorite musical genres. And yeah, The Midnight, and particularly the album Nocturnal. I listened to their other albums, and they're good, but the Nocturnal really, really hits. It hits the Blade Runner in me. That's what it does, and it hits a lot of that 80s sexy that I just love. So definitely give that a listen. Like I said, best track I thought off the album is Collateral. There's some tracks where there's singing in it, where there's vocals, but I was really, really, oh man, Collateral. Yes. So do give that a listen, since we're not in our post-sex world yet, or at least, some of us aren't. And you could totally fuck to The Midnight. Like, you could totally fuck to their music all the way. And I recommend doing so. You will have a good time. So, woo! Anyway, all right. That's it for this week's Wednesday Q&A for Sovereign Tech patrons only. Thank you so much to everyone for being a patron, and I appreciate those who stuck with me. I know there's patrons that have been here from the instant I started my Patreon page, and I'm so honored that you're here. I know a lot of you have been around for a good long while. I thank you. And, of course, more content to come out throughout August. You've got your Star Trek update, your relationship rhombus. You got your Star Wars update. Ooh, I'm reading that Thrawn book. Woo! You've got we have more Emotions Than Normal people to come out throughout the month of August. And might be some surprises. We'll see how that all shakes up. So anyway, plenty to come out for you. And of course, we still have our live Hangout Q&A that will be coming out in short order. So anyway, all right, that's it. We'll wrap this up. In fact, that live Q&A might have to be on a weekday. This month. It might not be able. I've been doing them on Sundays recently. I might not be able to fit it in on a Sunday. So if you have a weekday that works best for you, leave me a message on this sound on Patreon, or just message me on Patreon, and I'll try and get it in another. And we'll see what day works best for the patrons. So anyway, that's it. Woo, for your Sovereign Tech Wednesday Q&A. I will see all of you on the other side.